In the German language, learning the grammatical genders of nouns is not optional. It lays the foundation for everything in German grammar and vocabulary building, and it helps to make sure that you are understood when you're speaking in German. Understanding this concept is crucial to learning German because it touches basically every single topic within the entire German language. Each noun is assigned one of three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, or neuter, or der, die, and das. So why is this such a big deal? Well, for starters, it basically affects everything within the sentence. The articles, the nouns, the pronouns, all of the adjectives, everything that you see within the sentence is probably going to be affected by these genders in some way. Misidentifying the gender of a German noun can lead to confusion and also even change the meaning of the noun that you're using. When you're learning a noun in German, you're not just learning that word, you're learning the gender that goes with it, and also all of the grammatical rules and things that go with that. So it's not just this noun here, but also all of the things that encompasses. So remember, while we're talking about der, die, and das today, that it's not just about learning the grammatical gender that goes with a noun. It's about immersing yourself in the German language and understanding the structures that go with that. Chapter 1. Basics of German noun genders. As I mentioned earlier, there are three grammatical genders in German: masculine, feminine, and neuter. Each of these is usually represented by their default definite article, which is der, die, and das, respectively. The gender of the noun dictates which article should be used with it. So for instance, it's der Baum, which is masculine for tree, die Blume, which is feminine for flower, and das Haus, which is neuter for house. It's not just the articles that change, however. You can also change the adjectives based on the gender of the noun. So for instance, it would be ein großer Baum, eine schöne Blume, or ein großes Haus. Notice how the adjective ending changed from er for the masculine one to e for the feminine one and es for the neuter one. The noun's gender will also affect the way in which the sentence is understood, because the article is chosen not just on the gender of the noun, but also how it's being used within the sentence. So it's kind of a weird domino effect that happens within the German language, that if you have this as the subject, it uses one article, but if it's the direct object or the indirect object or the object of a preposition or the object of certain verbs, long list of things that can happen to them, but whatever it is that's affecting it, all of these things are affected by the base form that it is this gender of the noun that affects all of the things that go around it. Der Mann gibt dem Jungen den Ball. The man gives the boy the ball. All of the nouns in this example sentence are masculine, so we can easily identify which one is doing what within the sentence. Der Mann indicates that he is the one that is doing something, in this sentence, giving something. Den Ball tells us that this is the thing being given. It's a masculine noun, but we used den as the article because it's not the subject, it's the direct object. The boy is the one that's receiving the object here, which is the ball, so the boy is the indirect object. He's the one receiving the other object. So that makes it dem Jungen instead of der Junge. Learning the genders of nouns in German can feel a bit daunting at first, but just remember that you need to learn the gender of the noun as you're learning any new vocabulary. It's easier to learn these right up front at the beginning rather than to try and go back and memorize old nouns later on. There are also some rules and some tips and tricks that can help you along your way, which I'm going to be talking about in this video. As we move through the rest of this video, keep in mind that it's not just about the gender of the noun and memorizing some little word that goes with things, but it's also about the flow and the rhythm of the German language. Chapter 2. Masculine nouns. Let's start with the masculine nouns. There are certain categories of nouns in the German language that we can always count on to be masculine. Those include male people and animals, of course, as well as days of the week, months, seasons, and certain weather things. Let's take a look at some specific examples. The most obvious of these is male people and male animals. This includes the very much on-the-nose example of der Mann for the man, but also pretty much every occupation has its default form in the masculine form. Generally speaking, this is because we took a verb of some sort and we added er to the end of it to make it the doer of something, and that form is based in the masculine form. Not that all occupations are inherently masculine or feminine. So if there is a male person with an occupation, you can assume that the word for that occupation is also a masculine noun. The same is true if you have a feminine person in the same occupation. So for instance, there is der Lehrer and die Lehrerin. In English, we use the same word for both, which is teacher. The same logic can be applied to male animals, such as der Hund and die Hündin. Both mean dog, but one is male and one is female. There's also der Kater for a male cat and die Katze for a female cat, der Löwe and die Löwin for male and female lion. Although in English and in German we have a change between these two. We have lion in the English for the male form and lioness for the female. Be careful with overgeneralizing these kinds of things, however, because there are a ton of examples in the animal kingdom that don't follow this kind of distinction. For example, das Pferd, das Zebra, das Huhn, and das Faultier, just to name a few. Without going too far into details that I bring up later in this video, you can also be assured that baby animals, and baby humans for that matter, are also going to be neuter. It's das Baby and das Kind. It's also das Lamm, das Kalb, das Fohlen, das Küken, and a whole lot of other examples. Just be careful here because a puppy is der Welpe. Days of the week, months, seasons, and directions on a compass are all masculine. Luckily, there are no exceptions to this rule, but there are a bunch of people right now feverishly writing in the comments that das Frühjahr is a neuter noun and is also acceptable for the word spring. There is also die Regenzeit and die Trockenzeit for the rainy season and the dry season. Ironically, the word for season itself is feminine, it's die Jahreszeit. Outside of those pedantic examples, this rule works every time. Der Montag, der Dienstag, der Mittwoch, der Januar, der Februar, der März, der Winter, der Herbst, der Sommer, der Norden, der Süden, der Westen. As I mentioned before, most weather phenomena are also going to be masculine, but there are so many exceptions to this that it can't really be classified as a rule. Most precipitation, however, can be assumed to be masculine. For instance, der Regen, der Schnee, der Hagel, and der Nebel. There are certain endings that are added to nouns that are also always masculine. This includes ismus, such as tourismus for tourism, ig, as in der Honig, which is honey, or, such as der Motor, for motor, and ling, or ling, for der Schmetterling, butterfly. There are certain blogs that also say that words that end in er are almost always masculine, but words like die Mutter and die Schwester kind of throw a little bit of shade at that. I did read one blog that tried to explain it as er is a suffix, and when it's being used as a suffix, it uses it as a masculine noun, but it's not always being used as a suffix, which is what happened in Mutter and Schwester. This basically boils down to the same thing that I was going to say about it, which is most things that end in er are people, and those people are male. If it's a male person, it's going to be the masculine form, so der, whatever it is. Just keep in mind that er at the end of a noun isn't going to be 100% that it's a masculine noun. One last group that is masculine is cars, specifically name brands of cars. So for instance, der BMW, der Mercedes, der Audi, der Ford, and so on. While these rules are helpful for memorizing German nouns and their genders, it's important to realize that there are always exceptions to rules, so it's always best to consult a dictionary if you're unsure. Chapter 3. Feminine nouns. Now let's move on to the feminine grammatical gender and the article die. Just as we did with der and masculine nouns, we can use this with people and animals, specifically female ones this time. The most notable exception to this actually shows us another grammatical rule that overrides the intrinsic gender of the person. Any word that ends in chen or chen is going to be neuter no matter what. That includes das Mädchen, which is the German word for girl. The suffixes chen and lein in German are diminutives, which is a fancy way of saying that they generally make things smaller and cuter. In the process, they also change the gender of the noun into das, or neuter. In the instance of Mädchen, we started out with die Magd, which is an old word for maid. Then we added chen to the end of it to end up with Mädchen. That's das Mädchen, although it is die Magd. Some pseudo-intellectuals online might tell you that Mädchen is offensive because there is no male equivalent, which is simply just not true. There is der Mann and das Männchen and das Männlein, both referring to a small man. So why isn't the German word for boy neuter just like it is for girl? Well, that's actually because it's not a noun at all, it's an adjective, and we're just pretending that it's a noun. We started off with der junge Mann, and we just got rid of Mann at the end of it to make it the young instead of the young man. So what about the word Fräulein? Why isn't this used outside of like World War II movies or something? This is because there is already a perfectly good word for saying woman. There is no need for having Fräulein. You wouldn't do the same thing for a man. You wouldn't say an unmarried man is a Männlein or a Männchen. That would just be insulting. So why would you do that to a woman? There is no alternative word for Mädchen, however. It's just the only word for girl. While this is one way that you can look at it, there is another way that might make a little bit more sense. Back in the olden days, it was custom to find out whether or not someone was married, and you had to find that out before you could start courting them. If you knew that they went by Fräulein, you could automatically assume that they were unmarried. Nowadays, we don't have that same kind of tradition, and therefore we don't actually need the word Fräulein anymore. It's the same reason that in the United States, I don't know a single person who goes by Ms. or Miss so-and-so. Now that I have my mini rant out of the way, let's talk about the actual words that are used with the feminine form die. These can be used with female people and female animals. Like I mentioned before, you can use this with most occupations. In order to change from a male occupation to a female occupation, simply add -in to the end of the original noun. For example, der Lehrer, die Lehrerin, teacher, der Arzt, die Ärztin, doctor, der Bauer, die Bäuerin, farmer, der Anwalt, die Anwältin, lawyer, der Polizist, die Polizistin, police officer, and der Koch and die Köchin, cook or chef. You may have noticed that if there's a good place to put an umlaut in the noun somewhere, you generally do when changing it from the male to the female form. This is not any hard grammatical rule or anything, it's just there for aiding in pronunciation. The same trick can be applied whenever we're talking about animals. Der Hund, die Hündin for male and female dog. Der Löwe, die Löwin, lion and lioness. There are of course lots of animals that do not follow this convention. For example, der Hahn, die Henne, rooster and hen, and der Kater and die Katze for cat. While the brand names that we use for cars are masculine, the ones that we use for motorcycles are feminine. So for instance, if you have a BMW that is a car, that's der BMW. But BMW also makes motorcycles, which makes it die BMW. Generally speaking, ships are also feminine, so it is die Eisenhower and die Hamburg. The list of suffixes that are used with feminine nouns are incredibly helpful, as they are always feminine without exception. These include Heit, as in die Gesundheit, health. Keit, as in die Gemütlichkeit, coziness. Tät, as in die Universität, university. As in die Bildung, education. Schaft, as in die Mannschaft, team. And Zion, as in die Nation, nation. The cool thing about all of those nouns with those suffixes is that the plural form for every single one of them is always en. For example, die Freiheit, die Freiheiten, freedom and freedoms. Die Aktivität, die Aktivitäten, activities. Die Beobachtung, die Beobachtungen, observation and observations. Die Freundschaft, die Freundschaften, friendship and friendships. Die Funktion, die Funktionen, function and functions. There are also other suffixes that are generally speaking feminine, but they aren't a good enough rule for me to include in this video, with one exception. There are a bunch of nouns that end in E, and they are about 90% going to be feminine. For example, die Tasche, bag, die Klasse, class, die Lupe, magnifying glass, die Note, grade or note, and die Schule, school. Another cool thing is the plural forms of all of these nouns, when they end with an E, would be an N at the end for the plural, such as die Taschen, die Klassen, die Lupen, die Noten, and die Schulen. Chapter 4. Neuter nouns. Now let's move on to neuter nouns, which are indicated with the article das. I already mentioned the suffixes chen and lein. While I was talking about them with relation to people, you can also use them with inanimate objects and even animals. For example, der Baum, tree. It becomes das Bäumchen for the neuter form, or little tree. Der Hahn and das Hähnchen, chicken. Besides these two endings, you can also count on a few other ones to always be neuter. ment, for example, as in das Instrument, instrument, and Tum, as in das Eigentum, property. As I mentioned before, babies, both human and otherwise, are also usually neuter. For example, das Baby, das Kind, das Lamm, das Kätzchen, und das Kalb. As with all rules in German, there are of course exceptions to these rules, so it's again important to make sure that you just memorize the noun along with its gender whenever you learn a new word. Chapter 5. Exceptions and Special Cases. Once you get the general rules down and you start to figure out what's going on with genders of German nouns, you can then get into some weirdness that happens with them. Much to the dismay of German learners, there are several nouns throughout the German language that have multiple versions that all have different genders. So the noun itself is spelled the same, but it uses der instead of das, or das instead of die, or whatever. For instance, there are 3 words that all are spelled B-A-N-D. Band. There is Die Band, which is the musical group. There is der Band, which is a volume, as in a book within a series, and das Band, which is a ribbon. Strangely enough, while die Band is an Anglicism that was stolen from the English language, the other 2 words, der Band and das Band, both are actually related to each other through the verb binden, which means to bind or put together. There is also der Kiefer, which is a jawbone, and die Kiefer, which is a pine tree. I would love to tell you that this is a rare occasion where it has like a handful of nouns that do this within the German language. But whenever I was researching this video, I found a Wikipedia page that lists 1,600 different nouns that have multiple versions with different genders. One quirk that actually is helpful is that the last noun in a compound noun will tell us what the gender of the whole noun is. This means you don't need to figure out all of the other genders of the nouns within, you can just look at the very last thing and then find out what the gender is. There's the word das Rathaus, for example, which is neuter. That's because Haus is neuter, which is das Haus. But der Rat is advice, and it's masculine. It doesn't matter that Rat is masculine, we simply look at the word Haus to figure out that the whole word, Rathaus, is of course neuter. This also means, by the way, that when you see the word Rindfleischetikettierungsüberwachungsaufgabenübertragungsgesetz, that you can automatically assume that the word is neuter because Gesetz at the very end of it is neuter. When it comes to exceptions and special cases within German genders, your best friend is practice. The more you listen, read, and speak German, the more you'll get a feel for how this all works. Once you get enough exposure within the language, you'll start to develop your own Sprachgefühl, or the feeling that you know that it just sounds right, so that's the way it is. The more you practice, the more you will get this kind of feeling. To truly master the grammatical genders within the German language, you're going to have to integrate them into your daily life. So go around your house and label all of the things that you can find with der Schrank, or der Teppich, or die Tür, or whatever it is in your house, label it with the article included. I would also encourage you to use the plural form of the noun to go with it, so it's not just die Tür, but die Türen for the plural. Now, if you're looking for somewhere to practice what you've learned in this video or in other videos, or all of the German things that you're learning from wherever it is that you're learning them, I have a huge PDF full of resources that you can find at germanwithantrim.com. All you have to do is enter your email and I'll send it right over. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!